Hi, and welcome again to the Language Fuel Podcast. Welcome back if you've listened to our previous episodes. Otherwise, welcome for the first time. Kia ora. I'm Joanna. I'm your host here at the podcast. We try to keep it short and sweet, 10 to 15 minutes, and then that's it. Carry on with your day. Today, I want to talk about a topic that has come up quite a bit in the community. In fact, it's the highest requested topic when we talked about, what webinars should we do or what courses should we do. And that is for English teachers in particular, how to handle multi-level classes. So someone might have a community class and there's, 10, 15, 20 people in there, and some of them are much higher level, some of them are much lower level. How on earth do you manage that? That's kind of the struggle that a lot of people are facing. And when we did a webinar recently, we talked about the fact that, I'm not an expert in this, like with a lot of things that we talk about, but I do have the time to research and to look at some publications. Obviously running the resource room, we have books on our shelf that I can look at and see what is best practice being talked about out there. So I thought I'd give a quick overview in this podcast, and this will actually eventually make its way into the shape of a course or a series of mini courses, as the case may be, for our Language Fuel online training courses. And if you haven't seen them yet, we've got a whole newly refreshed set of courses and that sort of thing. So head on over to languagefuel.com, have a look at that and see if you want to have a go at our 14-day free trial, just to look around, see if it's going to be useful for you. We'd love to have you as a premium member of the community there. All right, so before we get started on teaching multi-level courses, first of all, I want to have a couple of provocative thoughts about this. It is not unique to language classes. You think about it, primary teachers, secondary teachers, they kind of have to do this all the time, even though you might think, when they're 5, they're all just starting out. But I'm sure any teacher of 5-year-olds will say some have been to kindy for a couple of years and they know how to hold a pencil, and some of them can be writing alphabet letters already. Others have no idea. There's a great diversity of ability in students. I'm thinking of, say, a Year 9 maths teacher. Students coming in from various intermediates, some are very familiar with certain types of subjects, some are unfamiliar with those subjects, so you've got to start somewhere, and you always will get varying ability. Think of the classic kind of rural school teacher. Could just be, certainly in the old-fashioned days in the movies anyway, you have one teacher, got to teach everything from kindergarten right up to, finishing school. So people have been doing this for a long time. So I guess I want to say there's nothing new in that sense, but the trick is, how do we manage it? The second thing I want to just be actually quite clear about is that no class is actually homogenous. So my thinking here is, even if you think you have a homogenous class, think about different skills: reading, writing, speaking, listening. Some will be excellent in a couple of areas and some will be weaker in a couple of areas. So in fact, I don't think all students are homogenous, even if we think they are. Whether it's skills, whether it's subjects, some people might be very competent at talking through a certain subject because they're familiar with it, and less competent at talking about another subject. And finally, situations, formal, informal, with friends, in a classroom. Every situation brings its different language demands, and students will be more or less familiar with different situations. So skills, subjects, situations, every student is different. So being conscious of teaching multi-levels, and some of us are more conscious than others, is actually not a bad thing, because it helps us to have a more student-centric method of teaching and planning, which is not a bad thing at all. In fact, it's a fantastic thing. So that's kind of what I want to start with. All right, now in terms of what the literature is saying, what people are sort of saying out there in my research, first of all, obviously the most important thing, if you are teaching to a set curriculum that has a certification or standards that you need to meet for, an exam board or something like that, you do have to teach to that, because, your students in the class are expecting that. So even if you do have a couple of more advanced students or a couple of lower students, you will need to be teaching to the curriculum if that's what your class is about. If that's what they've signed up for and they're in that class for a certificate or something like that, you need to make sure you are doing that, and you'll just have to supplement for the others. So that's kind of the first thing. But a lot of people that I've been talking to, certainly some of our members, have said, they're not in that situation. They're teaching more in the community, so that's a little bit different. Okay, the holy grail of multi-level teaching seems to be group work, and in fact being able to put different groups of students together to work on different things at the same time. So it's getting away from the type of model where the teacher is the one, presenting or talking to the students and then working with students to do activities and that sort of thing. And this is something that certainly in New Zealand, a lot of school teachers, and I'm thinking primary in particular because that's my experience with my kids, have just, all of them now just finished in primary school. Their teachers were fantastic at doing this. So some of you listening to this will kind of be like, but we already do that. What are you talking about? How is that, kind of new? If that's the case, forget what I'm saying here. But for a lot of us, we haven't been trained this way necessarily, and certainly our students are not used to being in a classroom where this is the norm. So there is a bit of a culture shift required if you're in that space where the norms, whether because of you or because of the students, are such that they're expecting the teacher to be presenting, having control over all the groups and that sort of thing. We need to be moving towards a space where the teacher is not the center of everything. It's the students in different groups doing different things at different times. And that way you can tailor make the types of activities that they're working on. Now, a bunch of questions that come up whenever I sort of say that. So the first question is, well, what am I supposed to do with all the others while I'm working with one group? Well, that is the question, isn't it? And the answer is basically you need to create self-directed activities. And that could be in the form of stations. So some teachers like to produce, maybe 4 or 5 different spaces, physical spaces around the classroom. Perhaps there's a table there, or sitting on the floor, or a cluster of chairs, something on the wall for people to stand around, whatever it looks like in your classroom. Having places where they can work together in groups or even individually. They may be going around stations individually, up to you however you want to design it. But the point is they are self-directed activities for the other students to do. Now, then the next question is, well, what kind of activities are they going to do without the teacher, right? So the next little section here that I've thought about are the kind of different categories of things that you could do. And of course, if this is totally new for you in your classroom, you'll have to work up to it. You're not going to certainly flip a switch and then one day everyone's kind of self-directed. But you need to, work up to it. Have one session in one lesson where you're going to break into 2 groups and then come back and, work your way up. So, kinds of activities. It could be technology mediated. So those of you who are fortunate enough to have access to perhaps a set of iPads, or even whether the students are bringing their own mobile phones, so in a bring your own device type of situation, or perhaps a couple of computers in the room. This is something you could consider, having technology mediated practice or lessons. And it could be technology prepared by you, we'll talk about that in a second, or it could be technology, accessing materials through that technology prepared by others. And there is a ton of material out there. So really, if this is new for you, you've got to just sit down with Google for a half an hour and figure out what is out there. There's tons of free stuff as well as paid stuff. I'm thinking of the big sites, Duolingo, FluentU, Babel, Mango Languages. All of them have a bunch of pre-prepared, activities, kind of games for students to play, some paid, some free, that you could get your students working on. Technology that you prepare, and this is getting into what we call the flipped learning. I might do another podcast specifically on how to organize that kind of flipped learning stuff, where you might have a presentation that you've recorded yourself, just in a quick video with your mobile phone or a laptop, something like that. The students then watch it while you're not there, and when it is your turn to work with that group, you focus your time on the practice or on the activities or help them making sure they've understood. But the presentation itself, or the communicating the concepts around what it is you're teaching, doesn't have to be done with you live. So that's a wonderful way to kind of get around that, the flipped learning idea. For those of you who are in teaching settings where you don't have access to technology, you want to be focusing on activities that are obviously low-tech. And again, could be prepared by others, could be prepared by you. So things that are prepared by others, obviously you might be buying games or buying sets of flashcards, or buying sets of readers. I always say it's wonderful for every classroom to have a huge box, maybe a plastic crate full of different graded readers for students to help themselves. And you can get all sorts of genres here. You can get fiction, non-fiction, some with sort of cartoonish kind of images, some with beautiful National Geographic kind of images, some more sort of scientific and that kind of thing. So there's plenty there, and if you're in New Zealand and you're stuck for reader ideas, give us a bell at the resource room. We can certainly help you out there, and games and all that as well. Having a set of games on the shelf, pull one out and go, right, this group's going to focus on that game. Probably you will have had to play it before, just to make sure that everyone knows how to play it. And again, you'll be preparing your students to move into this type of activity. Low-tech activities prepared by you. You might be preparing your own sets of flashcards. Or dice games, big cool cubes. We sell these big funky not exactly plastic, but sort of with whiteboard material around the dice. It's kind of real big, so big chunky, and you can write sentences, you can write phrases on it with a whiteboard pen. You have to roll the dice, and whatever comes up, you've got to tell a story about it, or maybe give further information, or finish the sentence, or whatever it is. There's all sorts of fun things that don't take too many resources, and you can prepare them for your students ahead of time. So we've talked about activity, self-directed activities that are technology mediated, other people's stuff or your stuff, that are not technology, so low tech, other people's stuff or your stuff. The other wonderful idea is to have a language assistant in your classroom. Language assistants don't need fancy training. All they have to do is to be able to speak the language a little bit better than the students you're teaching. Could be a native speaker, it doesn't have to be. Just someone who's a little bit more advanced than they are. Spend some time practicing, just talking, working through some exercises, whatever it is. And we've got a course on that in our online courses on how to work with a language assistant. So those are the types of things that you would do, whether you're just splitting into two groups and you work with one at a time and the other group does a self-directed activity, whether you do stations, so you might have 4 or 5 groups that kind of rotate, or whether it's individual, where you say to everyone, hey, spend 10 minutes here, and when you finish that activity, move to the next station, spend 10 minutes there. There's any number of ways that you could structure a class like that. Of course, you need to, however, work up to it and train them on what it means, and that it's okay, that they can still very much learn, even if the teacher's not 100% with them the whole time. Now, how do you structure a lesson like that? The best practice that I've seen is sort of a burger approach. So if you like the hamburger on top, the bun on top, bun on the bottom would be whole class activities. You brought them together, you do a warm-up as a class, and you're going to finish together as a class, but it's the middle part that you're going to be breaking up into groups. What I like about that is that it doesn't isolate anybody. The danger, if you've got perhaps, just a small group who are at a different level, whether it's particularly low or particularly high, and if you try to teach to the majority and sort of separate out those who are slightly at a different ability, they might feel that they don't belong in the class, that they're the odd ones out, that their class is not really for them. We don't want anybody to feel that way. We want them to feel included. So by making it completely normal that we break up into groups, that just says, hey, we've all got different abilities. And I really like that. So you start together, you finish together, and then you just happily work on different activities in the middle. It doesn't always have to be similar ability groups, in terms of have the advanced ones do this and the lower level ones do that. You could actually have some of the activities being cross ability groups. And the things you can do in cross ability groups, I would probably say focus more on conversational things or communicative activities. The lower levels who don't understand are going to be using the sign language and pointing and maybe drawing. They'll figure it out, and then the ones who have more ability will be able to perhaps fill in the gaps for them. So those are kind of easy things that you could do in cross-ability groups. And the final thing I want to sort of say about that is that you do need to manage the student expectations. Some of us have students in our classes who come from cultures where the expectation around education, or certainly formal education, is that the teacher is the one, giving out information and they are sitting down receiving it. Whether or not they're conscious of it, that could be their experience though. And so we need to work with them and convince them, that learning does happen. Keep individual records of your students. And, again, this is nothing new, and a lot of you are already doing this. So, having a portfolio where you're recording the stuff, the progress that your students are making, so they can see that they're making progress, they're learning, they're getting new language, even though you're not the one constantly with them. That builds confidence in their confidence in you as the teacher, that kind of you're still doing your job and you're making allowing learning to happen. And just talk with them, set those expectations, explain to them the new way you'd like to do your class. Tell them, that it's actually about them learning. It's not about you teaching. Those are very different things. And as long as you create the environment where learning can happen, it sort of doesn't matter how you structure your class. But it's that expectation, particularly for adults, that you may need to change the way you've done things in the past. But you'll still be achieving the same results, or better. In my opinion, it can often be a lot better, because they're able to explore at their own pace, repeat it if they need to, go further if they need to, whatever it is. All right, that's the super high level overview of the kind of stuff we've been talking about in the premium membership community, certainly. I hope you found that useful. If you find yourself in that situation where you've never done that before, you've never had to, teach different levels. So, as I say, this will make its way into probably a series of small courses that will go into a little bit more depth in each of those categories, certainly talk about the flip learning a little bit more, how to do that, what that kind of looks like. So if you are not a premium member of Language Fuel yet, why don't you go on to languagefuel.com, have a look. As I mentioned earlier, we've just redone our website, super excited. The team's been doing little happy dances because it's looking all fancy. Thank you, Sophie. And our courses have had a facelift. So go on in there, have a free trial, 14 days, totally free. If you decide that it's not for you, that's fine. You can cancel your membership anytime in those 14 days. You will not have paid a cent. But at least if you've been thinking about it for a while and you're not sure, go in and have a look and see if there's a few gems that you can learn from us there. We're aiming to continue to be adding courses each month, and what we have started doing now, we will be starting regularly from November, is having monthly webinars. We've had a couple of trial ones. That's what all this material came up, discussions around these things. So that's going to be an ongoing thing. We'll schedule some webinars on topic, whatever the hot topics are at the time, and I'll do a bit of research, gather kind of best practice ideas, and structure those conversations with the premium members. So love to see you as a premium member. Otherwise, community membership, hop on over to Facebook, completely free. Just post a couple of ideas here and there. You can talk about this podcast, share what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and we can learn from each other that way. Ka kite anō.
Thank you for listening to the Language Fuel podcast. You can see more at www.languagefuel.com/podcast, or you can see us on YouTube at youtube.com/languagefuel.